Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Southeast Termite and Pest Control. We haven't had a real cold snap yet, so insects are still trying to get into your home for their winter vacation. Basically, your home is their Panama City, and you don't want them coming into your Panama City. So what you need to do is call Southeast Termite and Pest Control and have them come out and do the fall invader treatment. I do it every year. It works so well for me. It's been huge change in terms. I used to have ladybugs all over my house. Once the spring comes and they start hatching and coming around, no longer. Southeast Termite and Pest Control can protect your home against ladybugs, stink bugs, all the fall invaders. SoutheastTermite.com. All right, let's take a look at the college football playoff top 10 as it was going into yesterday. There are only a couple of things in orange there. That means Oregon is the only team that lost. They're now 8-2. They had a 3-point loss last night at home to Washington. Everyone else is updated, correct numbers there. It will be interesting to see how far Oregon falls. UCLA would have been the next team in, I think, but they lost last night to Arizona, for those of you that missed it, so they're not going to climb up there. They've got 2 losses now. All right, so you see that there, but let me show you who's with us in this segment. So you're going to hear a lot of voices with graphics over them, so I wanted you to put the faces with the voices. Will Overstreet, Bob Hodge, Jimmy Himes, Josh Ward. I got 3 scenarios. I tried to make these difficult. The last one is probably the most realistic, I think, of probably what might happen. But I want to see who you guys would put in these situations. So let's take a look at scenario number 1. Georgia finishes undefeated. They're the SEC champs. Ohio State finishes undefeated as Big Ten champs. TCU, let's say they finish undefeated. That was a big win for them last night on the road, pressure on, and somehow their defense showed up. Big 12 champs undefeated. So those 3 are in. That means the last choice comes down to Michigan. We'll say they lost by 14 points at Ohio State, the same as Tennessee's 14-point loss at Georgia. Southern Cal would be 12-1. Pac-12 champs, only loss going back, their real life, is a 1-point loss at Utah. Michigan, Tennessee, or USC, who gets the 4th slot, gentlemen?
USC.
I agree with that.
I agree. Because if you look at that champ thing down there, then you would say, oh, easy, the champ.
And they've got some resume building wins coming up. Josh, they've got Notre Dame coming up. They've got
UCLA's still going to be ranked somewhere.
And then you'd have to probably be Oregon
in the Pac-12 championship.
You win those 3, your resume looks a whole lot better than it looks right now. So I would go Southern Cal.
And you would too, Bob?
Yeah, and for the reasons Jimmy just said, and I just think that championship thing, all else being equal, 1-point loss, 1 loss, and you're negative 1 point on the season, I'd say USC would jump Tennessee.
Now, I don't know that it's
Go Ducks.
I don't think it's he had to beat USC. I don't think it's likely that all 3 of those teams are going to finish undefeated, though.
I agree with that.
Somebody's going to fall, and even though my guess is it would be TCU, we've seen surprise teams. In 1998, everybody thought it was going to be your team. Well, we were just waiting for Tennessee. All these close games, they're going to lose. Never did.
Right.
So it may be Ohio State. Michigan's got Illinois. I don't think Illinois is going to beat them. They lost yesterday, but I don't think everybody here is going to go undefeated. So let's look at a different scenario. And this one's tough. I love this one. Scenario number 2. Let's say Michigan beats Ohio State. They're the Big Ten champs. They're undefeated. TCU, let's give them the benefit out. They go through the Big 12. They're undefeated. Now you got these decisions. Let's say Georgia loses in the SEC championship game by 3 to LSU. Ohio State's lost to Michigan, 1 point. And that wouldn't be at Michigan. That's a bad typo in my book. That would be to Michigan. They play them at home. So that'd be a 1-point home loss to Michigan. Tennessee has their 14-point loss to Georgia. Southern Cal, same scenario. They lost their 1-point game to Utah already, but they would go through and be Pac-12 champs. LSU, 11-2, SEC champions, 1-point loss to Florida State, 27-point home loss to Tennessee. Who's in with Michigan and TCU?
I can say who's out, and it would be Tennessee.
You think they'd be out in that one?
Yes, because you've got a 1-loss Georgia team that thumped you pretty good, better than the score indicates, and you still have USC hanging around with that championship. Same scenario as before. And then what do you do with a 2-loss LSU Southeast Conference champion?
Well, then.
Yeah, this becomes problematic for Tennessee because of the first exit is Tennessee because you do the head-to-head elimination, Georgia versus Tennessee, which is easy. So then you start to decide between champions. They're not going to take Tennessee over Georgia and LSU for sure, right?
Yeah.
So this scenario would be disastrous for Tennessee, I think.
I agree.
That's the worst case scenario.
I think it's a worst case. And then your decision, does LSU and Georgia get in from the SEC?
Yeah.
Does Southern Cal trump one of those? Even with 2 losses, I think if you're an SEC champ, it's hard to keep LSU out. I'm not saying I agree with
Yeah.
them, but I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
hard.
I
hard
think
to
in
keep
that
them out.
scenario, it's LSU and it's Georgia. Because I think that you're going to take a one-loss Georgia at this point. In this scenario, they think they're the best team. They're going in.
Well,
so-
And LSU would get in as SEC, so Southern Cal gets hosed.
Yeah,
but you
Southern
could
Cal
have
could
Southern
host.
Cal jump over, but that still doesn't help Tennessee. You could have Southern Cal ahead of LSU, 2 conference champions.
Yeah, because Tennessee over Georgia wouldn't make a lot of sense. 2 SEC teams, not including the champion, wouldn't make sense to the committee either.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're just giving you scenarios because I think if you asked any of us, we all think Tennessee's probably going to get in. And yet,
Yeah.
these 2 scenarios, everybody here thinks they don't get in. Let's look at a third scenario. All right, third scenario, Georgia. I think this is the most likely scenario. Georgia, undefeated SEC champs. Ohio State, undefeated Big Ten champs. So, who gets the next slot? You got Michigan 11-1, and again, let's say they lost by 14 at Ohio State, just like Tennessee's 14-point loss at Georgia. Southern Cal, Pac-12 champs, lost to Utah by only 1, 43-42. TCU, let's say they go 12-0, lose the Big 12 championship game by 1 point to Kansas State, who they already beat earlier in the season. Who gets in?
I think this is Tennessee and USC in this scenario. I don't think that TCU is getting there because they're undefeated.
Yeah.
But I just keep thinking that if they lose, the committee's going to drop them to the back of the bus, and so I think it's then Tennessee goes in, it's USC after them. in this
Okay, so
scenario.
Georgia,
agree.
Ohio State, Tennessee, Southern Cal for you. What are you doing?
Yeah, same thing. Same thing.
What are you doing?
Same
I'm
reason.
not Southern Cal TCU.
You
I think
take
TCU
TCU?
gets in with 1 loss. One of the knocks against them has been what? They don't have any defense.
Right.
Showed up against Texas, didn't it? If they're a conference champion, I think they get in ahead of Tennessee.
Well, and actually, so in this scenario, they're not the conference champ, right? Wouldn't that be it? Because they would have
Oh,
lost.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
they
wouldn't be.
would've
They lost
lost
to
in the
Kansas
Big
State.
12
That
title
is
game.
my fault. It's a bad typo. Thank you, Josh. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not conference champ. They made it to the championship game.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
That
Yeah, so
changes.
the loss.
Kansas
That's
State
my
would be
fault.
the-
Yes,
would
and
be
now
the champ.
I threw that on you. I'm sorry.
Curveball.
This is what happens when graphics are made
Go
at 2
ahead.
a.m.
The water's warm over here, Jimmy. You can come back to the 3 of us.
Gurgle, gurgle. Then I think Tennessee would get in
Yeah,
this one.
let me put that back up there. Let me show you what we're talking about. I'm sorry. Can we get back to playoff scenario 3, Chris? This is what they're looking at on the screen. See, I left in Big 12 champs. I didn't erase that from the graphic, and I meant to. If they lose in the Big 12 championship game, obviously they're not champions. 12-1, 1 point loss in the championship game. So their only loss all year, 1 point loss to a team they'd already beaten earlier, but you still booed them.
Yeah.
It's all about champions.
Yeah,
Josh, what are you doing?
I think TCU has to be 13-0 to get in. If they're not, then I think they're out. Michigan versus Tennessee for the resume. Tennessee's resume is going to be more impressive. So I think it's USC and Tennessee as teams 3 and 4.
Well, everybody has
Yeah,
kind of
agree with
the
that.
same votes on pretty much all of
Yeah.
these, correct?
Yep, pretty
Well, I
much.
didn't until I found out TCU.
Well, that was my fault. That was my fault. So, well, that's surprising. I think that's interesting that everybody here came out with the same verdict on 3 different scenarios. I expected a little more debate.
I like their chances for scenario 3 to play out too.
Yeah, I think scenario 3 is probably the more likely of those, but just the responses here does make you more concerned about something else going haywire.
Well, I mean, that's the reason to me, everybody in America but Georgia lose.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what helps Tennessee the most is Georgia wins out and everybody else who made the listings loses.
And you need Ohio State or Michigan to win that game in a just
Yes.
crushing cakewalk, as you said
Yeah.
last week. You need to blow them out. Whoever wins that needs to blow out the other.
And you're probably right about that, but if you look at their resumes, they're not very good. Michigan's
No.
got a win over Penn State. Ohio State's win over Notre Dame is looking better right now, right?
Right.
And then they would have a win over Penn State. That's all they've got right now.
If Southern Cal beats Notre Dame, then does the Notre Dame game? That's the funny thing is we're playing all these games as, yesterday it was, well, Kentucky's loss doesn't help Tennessee. Okay, well, Illinois' loss to Purdue doesn't help Michigan because they got them next week. Doesn't help Ohio State or Michigan because they're probably, whoever's coming out of the West in the Big 12 championship game is going to have 3 or 4 losses. So everybody's got those going on right now. I wouldn't worry too much about it's basically you needed Alabama to win last night and they did. You need LSU to keep looking good and you need Georgia to keep looking good.
Tennessee's gotten help each of the last
You
2
don't want LSU to
Saturdays
lose.
after the loss to Georgia.
No,
Yeah,
you
'cause that would
don't.
hurt
until
your-
they get
yeah.
to the SEC championship.
Yes, yeah. So everybody but Georgia and LSU is who you need.
Yeah.
All right, very good. When we come back, how did Georgia stop Tennessee, and have others tried the same things? Coach Hamilton will show you how they did it. We'll compare Alabama, Kentucky, and Georgia and what they did, what they didn't do. That's next. Come on back on the Sports Source.